Hi, I'm Phil Palucha from Billionaires in Boxers, and you are about to engage with Up-Level Your Communication, hosted by Miluna. Wow, this is going to be powerful. Communication is at the heart of everything that is good about business and about sharing with your fellow humans, and Miluna is phenomenal at helping you share that message and also interview some pretty special and amazing guests too. Check it out right now.
Welcome to Up-Level Your Communication. I'm your host, Dr. Miluna Fausch. On this show, I will be interviewing some of the most interesting business people in the world. We'll focus on up-leveling your communication and leadership skills so that your voice can be heard and you can make an impact in the world. Welcome to another episode of Up-Level Your Communication. My guest today is Mr. Mike Clark, and he's joining us from near Salt Lake City, Utah. He says, get your financial house in order. He has raised $35 million for an education platform, raised money for many other businesses. He used to sell wine, and he loves his family, movement, the process. That's what he says, and he'll explain more. And I'm just going to add Swiss chocolate to that list.
Yes.
Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Please tell us in your words what you do.
Well, I appreciate the time, Miluna, and appreciate you being here, me being here with you. What I do is I build financial teams. Miluna, there's a lot of information on the internet, good and bad, and being able to decipher that. But the important part is you having the correct data for yourself and your economy to make the best financial decisions for you and you alone. And that may be advice from other people, your uncle, your aunt, your family member, but you, as the greatest asset of your life, have an economic plan, and you need to follow that plan, not anybody else's. And so those financial teams help bring that clarity.
And folks, that right there is what sets Mike apart. Love that. Your greatest asset is yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the things that you do is help take the scary out of money. It's such a loaded topic. Most of us don't learn about it. I know I've studied and studied and studied. I know you have as well. I wasn't trained well, and most of us aren't. It's emotional. We get all stuck. And tell us what the number one thing is that keeps us from getting our financial house in order.
That's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of pieces to that. I think the biggest thing is we have belief systems across our life. Most of them are false beliefs. They were given to us involuntarily, you might say, by the media, by friends, by parents. Some of these have been passed down for generations, and we don't know why we have them, but we just have them. And I think the greatest story that I ever heard, it's non-financial, but I saw this on a cooking show. There was a lady cooking, and she had this roast, and she would cut the ends off, and she never knew why she cut the ends off. So she went to her mom and said, well, it's just what I did. Then they went to the grandmother and said, well, I cut the ends off because it didn't fit in the pan. There was no rhyme or reason, but the grandmother did it, the mother did it, now the daughter did it. And that's how we perceive, a lot of times we perceive money, is that our parents did it, so now we did it, and our parents did it because their parents did it, but we don't understand that. And so I think the best thing to learn is, what is your relationship with money? Not your parents. How do you see money? And what is that relationship? Are you a spender? Are you an investor? Are you a saver? And understand that dynamic, and then build an economic plan, a financial plan around that personality type, and understand what that means.
Love it. Because some of us don't question, as you just told us this story. We don't question why that has been done. And it's
right.
Deeply held beliefs. They are, aren't they? They're so deeply held. Thank you. We need to figure it out for ourselves. What do we believe? What's going to serve us? Now, when you say you love movement, I think you mean exercise, but let's find out. And you also say you love the process.
Yeah.
Tell us about those two things you love. What do you mean, Mike?
So movement is everything in terms of movement. And I read a book a couple of years ago that has to do with the process. And I'll get to that here in a second. But the movement side of it, is I play golf. And the joke is, any forward progress of the ball is good progress. Now, I understand life's a little bit more dynamic than that. But if you wake up today and you make some progress, just for you get another lead, another prospect, you set an appointment, you schedule a new client up, you send an invoice. Those are all progress, right? That's movement, right? And so there's only two directions that we are really moving in, is either we're stagnant or we're moving. And if you're stagnant, you're really falling behind.
Yes.
And in today's environment, with everything moving so quickly and information flowing at us all the time, we have to move. We have to do something, take action in some direction. And so for me, the movement is, it doesn't matter if it's the wrong direction, just take action. You can pivot, you can make iterations. The second part of that is that process, is that don't get fixated on the result. But if you understand what that process is, how do you get from point A to point B, right? How do you shift a belief system? How do you shift a paradigm, right? How do you go from the position you're in at work to another position? There is a process for everything. And I don't mean to break this down to mathematical equations, but it's ones and zeros if you look at the movie The Matrix, right? There is a process for you to go from where you are today in any aspect of your life to where you want to be. But if you do the daily action, the movement, you don't worry about the result. For me, it's just going through the movement and the process to get there. The results will follow if you take those actions.
Well said. Thank you. If we do just one thing a day to further our career or life, it adds up, doesn't it?
100%. And if you're intentional
movement, not just anything or any phone call, but what's really going to move this for me today? What if for me, it's a bolder ask, or asking someone to be on the podcast like you. I find the higher functioning the person, the more likely they'll be on the show. It's the folks down in the middle and the weeds that, I don't have time, or I don't want to do that, or isn't that interesting?
It is. And
the higher functioning, the more wealthy, the more successful, the more they're likely to make time to do things. I find that fascinating, and I test it all the time, and I'm right, because I test it.
And it's a value creation, right, Miluna? There are those people that are in that producer mindset versus that scarcity mindset. And the producer mindset is that of creating value. Now, I know that's a buzzword in today's social media, right? It's like create value and freemiums and all these things. But if you're intentional with your time, and that is your purpose in creating value within your niche, well, then it's easy to say yes to someone like you, because you're out there creating value as well. And then how can I help you create value, whether it benefits me or not? And one of the principles that I follow, there's 13 principles of prosperity. One of them is exchange creates value. And a lot of people are like, well, is that dollar? It's not dollar, because if I learn something from you, or through this conversation, somebody else learns something that propels them into that next step, then that's the value. So our exchange then creates a ripple effect of value for somebody listening.
I love that. And I love that you said that, because that was one of my questions I was going to ask you. So I'll see if there's anything more around that. What a beautiful principle. And if we follow principles, what do we want to call it? Integrity, ethics, morals, whatever you call that, to live a life of integrity, it makes such a difference.
Right.
Now, how would a family office function in the highest sense of the word? Financial responsibility for the client, incredible service, And in terms of all the professionals that are supposed to be working together on behalf of the client. Now, we know that doesn't always happen.
Right.
My CPA and financial advisor didn't play together well at all. One has been fired, and I think the other one's got to go as well.
Love it.
What's the ideal? Because I know that's what you have built and continue to build.
So if you look at a traditional family office, they are typically reserved for those individuals with, $20+ million of total assets. And you're right, it's a lot of money. And the reason it's reserved for them typically is that it costs a great deal of money annually to keep all of these professionals on retainer. So when we look at the separation between the wealthy and the not, these teams come together and they communicate to make sure that the investments are aligned with the tax plan's aligned with the estate plan, while the individual is out producing in the world, creating more money, right? So they're allowed to go do that and create value in the world. The challenge for the rest of us is we don't have 6 figures a year to put into these retainers. So what we do is we have this nice little financial junk drawer in our homes, like the normal junk drawers, and we just shove financial tools into this junk drawer, very rarely understanding what the tool is, what the utilization is, and how does it work within my overall financial plan. And so there is the ability to build a team, but the problem is most of us, family, life, work, kids, we don't have time to interview. So my job and any financial advisor's job ought to be building that team for you so you don't have to go interview, right? You don't have to go interview a new CPA, a new attorney. They should have those resources. Now, there's bedside manner, Miluna, you know that. And not every professional is going to be in line or have that gut feeling with a client that says, yes, I want to use you. So as a financial advisor, they ought to have options. And because they're not being compensated by these individuals, and they shouldn't be compensated by the individuals, then I don't care who you use. And that, in my view, which I'm sure we're going to get into, that in my view is a true fiduciary. I'm not tied to the result of who you select. I'm presenting you individuals that I know are going to work well with individuals. And if they don't, then you and I as a client, Miluna, will fire that individual. And I'll make a joke here because I want to be very, on a very selfish level here. I want, as a client, let's just say you're a client.
Yeah.
As on a client standpoint, I want you and me to fire the CPA, attorney, business coach, whatever the case is. What I don't want to have happen is you firing me. Right? And so if I can provide that value and if I can build that team, you are less likely to fire me while I'm creating more value for you.
I don't think that's self-interest at all. I think it's a beautiful business model because you're holding yourself accountable to this level.
Right.
And becoming so valuable, we won't let you go. And what a wonderful thing. Music to our ears. Yes, my audience, this is why Mr. Mike Clark does things differently and why people receive such massive value. And yes, he's helping myself and my husband right now. So there you go. I know that for a fact. We've had so many incredible conversations so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Haven't we?
Yeah.
Cars, you name it, we talk about it. Now, you started at Johnson & Johnson.
I did.
And you told me a great story. I think it was something like this. You asked your boss to not say no to you, but you wanted her to say, what can we do without saying no? And I just love that. That to me is an example of beautiful communication, clarity, boldness. Please tell us the story in your words. And because I know you to be a can-do, proactive man. Let me back up a second. Were you always that way? And then tell us this story about what can we do? I don't want to hear what we can't do.
To answer the latter question, yes, I've always been this way. my junior year in high school, real quick, there were some things that the head coach was doing for the football team, and nobody wanted to approach the coach and say, hey, we don't want to do this anymore. For some reason, the seniors looked at me and said, Mike, go tell the coach we don't want to do this anymore. So it started then. But the story with Johnson & Johnson was we got a new manager, and the rumor was that she was very harsh and just abrupt and sharp and hard to get along with. So my first encounter with her was at a sales meeting, and we're out in Florida, and I walked up to her, and I was walking side by side, and Sue, how you doing? My name's Mike. She's like, I know. And she sounded very abrupt. It was very short. Okay. And I said, Sue, obviously you know that there's rumors, right, on your personality. She said, I know. I said, so here's a deal with you. I don't know the ins and outs of the business side of medical devices, but I do know that I run a territory, and if I make money, you make money. So what I ask is that if I bring you a deal, don't tell me no. What I ask is that you tell me how to do it in a way that's more business oriented for the company. Because if I make money, you make money. And it was very simple. We ended up growing a 4-year relationship, and I did quite well with Johnson & Johnson. But I think in terms of communication, I think this is a kind of a good segue, Miluna, because what this podcast is really about is communication. Far too many times, we as consumers lead on our professionals, whether it's a doctor, CPA, an attorney. And for some reason, we put these individuals on pedestals and we don't question them.
Yes.
And I'm not asking you to question them in a way that's disrespectful. But I've had clients or prospects that have been presented amazing opportunities, one in which was $150,000 of recovered revenue from the IRS. He went to a CPA. The CPA gave him a bunch of reasons why it's not real. Went back to my colleague. My colleague gave him the paperwork to show that it was real, and the CPA still kind of bashed it, if you will. The guy walked away from $150,000. Now, Miluna, here's the catch. Let's just cut it in half. $75,000. Let's just say my colleague was off base by 50%.
Okay.
This individual still walked away from $75,000 of recovered revenue from the IRS, overpaid taxes. And because he was unable to communicate clearly and effectively with authority to his CPA, he walked away. Now, any business owner watching this, if I handed you a check for $75,000 today, what would that do for your business? Right?
Would help us a lot. And 150? Let's
light up.
Just, my goodness.
Right. Yeah. And so those are some of the, when we talk about communication and we talk about your financial economy and your financial plan, I'm dead serious. This is your plan. You hire the CPA. They work for you.
Yes.
You tell them what to do and not to do. Their job is to keep you out of trouble. Your job is to direct them in a way that is feasible for you, that is in line with your financial plan. That's the difference. And I learned that selling medical devices because as a medical device rep, Miluna, I didn't go to medical school. My undergrad's in kinesiology, which is the study of movement, by the way, which is ironic.
Yes.
But I was in an OR early in my career. And I always heard from my mentors that if anything's going wrong in the operating room, just say stop. That's it. Stop. And I was watching the surgeon do something. He was doing a shoulder surgery and he was going to do something that wasn't quite effective for the patient outcome. And it just came out. I said, stop. Nurse, surgeon, assisting nurse, everybody just froze.
Froze.
And in my head, Miluna, I'm like, oh my gosh, that worked.
It worked.
And so I was so kind of scared that it worked.
Yes.
That there was a very awkward audible pause because I didn't know what to say. So the surgeon turns and goes, what? Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Well, we're shocked because it actually worked.
That's it.
Look at, thank goodness I've been on the table. I've had, and third, now you can go ahead and communicate what would be better for this patient on the table.
100%. And that's what the listeners need to understand is that communication with those professionals, they are hired by you. It's your life. It's your financial future. They are not going to pay your bills or pay your retirement if they make a wrong decision. So question them respectfully, question them, and get the answer that you need to make an effective decision.
Let's pause for a second. Take that in, my dear audience, because Mike's laying some truth on you. They work for us.
100%.
Figure a way to speak up. Let's get clear on our communication. You're the boss.
100%.
You're the boss. I had to talk to my housekeeper this morning. She did something in my home, and she's amazing, and I fired a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. And we had to have the talk. And I was almost a little weird about it. I thought, wait a minute, who's paying?
So,
this doesn't work. Whose house? Who's paying the mortgage? Therefore, we want to think about how can I sensitively, respectfully, and effectively communicate what I need to have happen here.
Yep.
And the beautiful thing, as you said, Mike, when we do that, then the other person is more likely to be clear back to us. And now we can have an actual deep conversation that goes somewhere.
100%. And here's on the finance side, Miluna, is that I'm not a huge fan of Dave Ramsey, but I do agree with a lot of things that he says. And I heard him one time say, look, if any financial professional, if you get that gut feeling that they're talking down their nose at you, don't use them.
Yes.
I mean, it's so important to understand that you have the ability to walk away. You have the ability to say, this isn't right for me, and here's why. And if they can't explain that, if they can't communicate to you in a way that you understand it, that's clear, then don't use them, because a financial plan is only as good. Any financial plan, business plan, cash flow statement, income statement, anything. It's only as good as you are able to understand what's in it.
Yes. And
right?
Man. Yes.
That's it. If you can't take the data and put it into your head and articulate it back to somebody, then you need to find somebody that either one can do it better, or two, create a plan that they can explain. Right? Because you're not going to buy into a plan that you don't understand.
It's absolutely true. And I love that you mentioned that when we get that ooh feeling,
right?
I get it in my stomach. Some people get it somewhere else in the body. It's telling you something very, very important. If that person is dissing you like that now, they think they're above you somehow. Or I know one time I wanted to invest in a company that was sustainable or B corporation or something. And this potential financial advisor said, well, those companies don't make money, and that's just silly. You want to invest in this and this and this. That was the end of our conversation. He was talking down to me, and how do you know what I know? You don't know what I know. You don't know what I've studied. And to disrespect somebody's choices, that's a whole other thing. So
when I had a client that had three rentals, right? 3 home rentals. And there were some extenuating circumstances, but the advisor called and said, I think you need to sell 2 of them. And so she calls me as the introductory, and she told me the story. And the first thing out of my mouth is, you're not selling any of them. And she's like, huh. And why is that? And I went through the math.
Yes.
This is why you're not. And she said, and we have a 4-step process. I won't get into that. But in the first step of this 4-step process, she goes, I want to work with you. And I was like, well, we've got 4 steps. She's like, I don't care. And I'm like, okay, out of curiosity, why? And she's like, because my advisor currently said I need to sell 3 homes, never gave me a reason why. She just said I needed to do it. You broke down the math and gave me a reason not to sell them. And those are 2 different things. Provide the data, and you as the client will be able to, you know the answer. You know what direction to move into, right? You just need the data. That's all it is. Information.
Thank you. So that we can make the correct decision financially and for our future. Yes. Now, in the role at Johnson & Johnson, you said you learned that the more value you provided, the more income you make.
Always.
So that's the concept of exchange creates wealth that you were referring to earlier. Do you want to add anything else to that? How can we add more value? Or why don't folks understand if they're going to ask for a raise, they need to be able to pitch why they're adding income to the company? Better PR, more sales, whatever that is, that's bringing more value. Yes?
That's a tough one, because I think there's a lot of things in the universe now, in the world, that have gotten us here, right?
Yes.
As an example, and this isn't political, but it's, everybody got at awards 10, 15 years ago, and everybody deserves, and this word deserve, and the reality is you don't deserve anything.
No.
Right? And it's this whole corporate versus employee thing. And I understand the dynamics. I don't agree with a lot of the income disparity. Yeah. But the reality is that they started the company, you did not. Right? There is a cost to have you in that seat working for their company that they've put on their life on the line. And if you want to go do that, you're able to do that. And there's a lot of vehicles to do that. But it doesn't matter if you sit in a seat or you own your own company. If you don't create value in the world, the dollars will never follow. And the caveat is that there's this social influencer world that they don't create any value. They just sell somebody else's product. And I don't like the word influencer. They're really just modern day salespeople. But when I'm sitting in an OR and I look at a patient on the table, that is somebody's mother, father, daughter, brother, cousin, son, whatever the case may be, and they want to have as close or exact life that they had before they were on that table. And so if I can do something to get them to that point, then that is the value. And the surgeons, if you're authentic about it, which is a different conversation, right? If you're authentic about it, then people understand that, and that goes back to that gut feeling. Right? It goes back to that they're not in it just to sell something else. You're honestly in it for the better outcome. And that's how I've approached everything, is that I've built a career, whether it's medical devices, raising capital, or doing what I'm doing now, is that somebody has a need and somebody has the expertise. And I've built a career and a lot of relationships globally by just marrying those two. And then the key is just stepping back and letting them do what they need to do and injecting when I can, because as a client, you may not know what questions to ask because you just don't know you don't know, right? So if I can just step back in, hey, by the way, if we did this, what would the outcome be? And they were like, oh, I didn't even think of that, right? But allowing the two people that have a need and the expertise to really connect and go from there. That's what I've done for a long time.
Now, you shared with me that there are no tax loopholes. Let me repeat that. I don't know where that came from. Maybe you know the origin or the belief around tax loopholes.
Yeah.
There are just tax laws.
Period.
Tell us about that.
So for the longest time, media will talk about tax loopholes, the rich and tax loopholes, and it's driving this narrative in society that for some reason the rich don't pay any taxes. Okay? And the bigger thing is that there's no such thing as a tax loophole, meaning the people that tend to complain, and I don't mean to be offensive, but the reality is the people that tend to complain about the tax loopholes are W-2 employees. The media created a narrative for the people, the masses, by the way, that are W-2 employees that cannot participate in the tax code.
Yes.
And the reality is if you have just a basic entity and you have, especially nowadays, a lot of people have side hustles. The more money you make, the more the tax code opens up. Because Miluna, here's the thing. You can go online and look up the tax brackets. And that is what most people think as the tax code. But the tax code itself, which we hear all the time, is hundreds and hundreds of pages long.
Yes.
So you look up one page on the internet on tax brackets, married, income earner, single, whatever the case is. There is 99.9% of the tax code that you haven't even represented, that you haven't even looked at. And you haven't looked at it because, one, you don't know how to read it. And two, honestly, you don't make the money to even engage in that process. So you complain about it. And once again, I don't mean to be harsh, but it comes back, back to the beginning of the conversation, being clear on your financial plan and understanding the rules that you're able to play with. That's it. If you know the rules, you can play the game. But I'm going to tell you right now, they're not going to change the tax code because the people with money pay the politicians to not change the tax code. So stop complaining about it.
It does no good.
It does no, it never will.
Hope all y'all here in the United States voted, and I know most of my votes didn't come true. We'll stop there. But the tax code and laws, the reason wealthy people can use it is because they have the staff, they have the money, and they have the ability to structure so they pay only the tax they have to by law.
But here's the other thing. I've never, and this is, both sides of the aisle play this game, right? This isn't left or right. This is literally both sides are getting paid by the wealthy not to change this thing. But here, I mean, the challenging part is that like neither side is going to come save you, right? And it goes back to the look, forward movement, get up. And now you got me on a soapbox here. Like, because for the guys,
For a while.
So for the guys,
Do it.
and I've told guys, like, stop watching 4 hours of NFL on a Sunday. Pick up a book. Like, we have an abundance of information at our fingertips these days. There is absolutely no reason that you can't find information on something 15 minutes a day on taxes. Like, what is an LLC versus an S Corp versus a C Corp? When do I have one? When do I transition? Like, all of these things are readily available on our phones, right? So there is absolutely zero reason.
We have no more excuses.
None.
We used
None.
to drive to the library.
Right.
Right? At least in my age generation, yeah. And I can do it on my phone. There are all the phone uses. Not to take responsibility, educate ourselves, and hire the right professionals to help us.
That's it. It's not hard, Miluna. And that's it's the biggest frustration that I have is that this whole, the rich get richer because they understand how money flows. And they understand how money flows because they have a team and they took the time to learn it.
Yes.
Right? And then people say, well, hey, now rich people watch NFL too. I get it. But they didn't. At some point in time, they were not spending 4 or 5 hours a day watching NFL. They weren't spending 3 hours looking at the fantasy football league. And I don't mean to pick on guys, but on the women's side, the wealthy didn't spend hours scrolling through Instagram. Right? Like,
No, I don't even, I can't imagine, but yes, it's a fact. And they're probably still not doing that. The very wealthy men and women are probably still not doing NFL all day Sunday and doing Instagram pictures whenever.
No.
Yes. Yes. I'll go to the next question. There's so much we could unpack, but yes. Your journey began with learning more and more about how finances and money really work.
Yeah.
And you were introduced to a firm in Utah that taught financial literacy at a very high level.
Right.
Now, how did that change your life?
So I didn't come from money, right? Like most of us, large percentage of us. And my relationship with money was save. My mom told me not to spend money on anything. I remember after I made a little bit of money, I bought a Guess watch for like $64 and I was wearing it one day and she got like mad at me. And I'm like, well, I earned it. She's like, no, you didn't. Save your money. Don't buy, Anyway, that was my relationship.
There's a belief.
There's a belief system, and it wasn't mine.
Thing or don't have nice things.
It was just told. It was beat into me, right? And so I got my undergrad. I went working Johnson & Johnson. Here I am, 24 something years old. I'm making six figures, and this was early 2000, which six-figure income was really good for a 24-year-old. And people were telling me, hey, you need to do something to prevent taxation. And I was like, I don't even know. I mean, I get it, but I don't know what you're talking about. And so a friend of mine, a couple years later, introduced me to this education. It was 6 meetings. It was life insurance, health insurance, attorney to understand entities, the structure of building a team. And I met with these individuals, but the importance, Miluna, was how do these play together? Like, what does it mean to have a true financial plan? And so I went through this process. I started reading more books on financial literacy, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Cash Flow Quadrant, The Millionaire Next Door, all of these books as part of the process. And I started to attend live events talking about self-directed IRAs and all of these other tools that we have available that nobody teaches us. And at the time, I was pretty frustrated with the politics of selling medical devices. Mm-hmm. And my buddy who introduced me to the firm said, hey, you're frustrated. Why don't you move to Utah? Because I was originally from California. Why don't you move to Utah and become an advisor with us? And I did.
You said,
and I left Johnson & Johnson after 5 years working with them. And I moved to Utah and became an advisor. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Hi, Mike's history. I love it.
Yeah.
When you helped businesses raise funds, you discovered a complete disconnect in communication.
Yeah.
And that continues to this day. In fact, it's worse.
Worse.
We continue to decline in this. And one of the reasons I was so frustrated living in Silicon Valley for 5 years is because folks only wanted to add to their tech skills.
Right.
But they had no effective leadership communication at all. And LinkedIn did a survey. They couldn't find people. Well, I'd say they just ignored it and hired a bunch of folks, but they didn't want to train with me. And I thought, what on earth is not being understood here? Talk to us about why we've got to be able to communicate to pitch, raise funds, make a presentation that'll change somebody's life, get on the pulpit and preach a sermon, get elected for political office. Isn't there a huge part of the communication that we're not looking at?
100%. And I think within business specifically, most business owners go into it with, hey, I need to raise money for today, right? I need this for this next year. And what I found is working with business owners, and this actually goes into individuals as well, is they don't have the end in mind, right? The Chinese, they always joke about 100-year plans, right? We have annual plans that we rarely ever hit. But what I found was that a business owner would go and they would want to raise money, and then I would ask them, what's the end game? Like, what do you want to do? And they're like, I don't know, sell it. Okay, well, what does that look like? And then reverse engineering it to structure the entity at the very beginning, structure the cap table, meaning all the investors.
Yeah.
What is your ideal investor? Because I'll tell you, not all money's good money.
No.
Right? So it's like a marriage. If somebody cuts you, $1 million check, do you want to be married to them for the next 5 to 7 years? And if that answer is no, as hard as this may be, I would tell you not to accept the check. Right? Okay. But if you don't have the end in mind, then money's just money. And you're just like, I need another $100,000. I need this. I need that. And you don't look at it in terms of a structural process, which, by the way, creates the core value along the way. And it also creates the clear communication, because now you're communicating clearly to the investors as to what you want, the partner that you want, right? Like going into Shark Tank. And a lot of the pitches are like, look, I don't necessarily need money. I just need your expertise. But they're able to communicate that because they started at the beginning and they understood where they wanted to go, and they're not going to deviate from that plan. And I think that's where a lot of business owners fail. But the bigger part, is that they go to their CPA and they ask for information, and the CPA doesn't have the knowledge to do that. And so what they do is they point the finger. Oh, that's not my job, it's theirs. And then you go to the business attorney and you ask them about, hey, if I structure this entity, what does that do to taxation? That's not my job, it's theirs. And then you go to the investment banker, hey, if I want to structure this for this exit, how do I do the business entity? Well, that's not my job, it's theirs.
Ooh, yes.
And so the business owner is literally left confused and just trying to piecemeal this thing together. And it's all because of the egos that everybody doesn't want to play nice with each other, because I don't want to look dumb in front of the business attorney or that attorney. So I'm just going to point the finger. And that's where people get lost. And it's the same with financial planning. Look, I don't mean to be morbid, but at the end of the day, we're all going to die, right? We have a single journey. And I was once told by a former Air Force pilot that, and I might get the math wrong, but you'll understand the gist of it. If you're flying at 100 miles an hour and you're 1 degree off of your destination, depending on how that is, every 100 miles you end up being 10 miles off your mark.
Yes.
Okay. So think about this. You think of your life as a trip from San Francisco to New York. And it's a one-way ticket, right? That's it. And you can make adjustments along the way. But if you're 1 degree off for the whole flight, you'll end up in Florida, as an example. Now, Florida is a great place, Miluna, but it doesn't mean that's where you want to go.
I wanted to go to New York.
You wanted to go to New York. Or the other way, you could end up in, Canada, freezing your tail off, right?
It's true.
So my point is that you cannot afford emotionally, spiritually, financially, your family, any of it, to continue to be 1 degree off for 10, 15, 20 years. You have to be clear on what you want so you can communicate that to the professional so they can hopefully be honest and say, I can help you with that.
Yes.
Right? And that, it all comes back to communication, Miluna. Understanding where you are in the world and where you want to go so you can find that team and build that team that gets you there.
Let's all take a deep breath and make sure that we've heard what Mike has shared with us. Gorgeous, beautifully said. Share with us how folks can connect with you. What are the best ways to reach out?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I know there's 1,000 Mike Clarks on LinkedIn. The other way is just by email. Happy to reach out to me via email. I think, Miluna, you'll have that somewhere in the description.
I'll have that in the show notes for the podcast.
Sure.
Is there any way you can speak aloud for the TV show, your email and the 2 websites where people can also find you?
Absolutely. So my email is mclark, CLARK, at protectionpointadvisors.com. And that's ORS at the end. So mclark at protectionpointadvisors.com. The advisory firm is protectionpointadvisors.com. And we have the repository of professionals, Miluna, that we pull from in terms of building these teams. And you can find that repository of professionals at nrnamerica.com. So at Nancy Reagan, Nancy America.com. And then on LinkedIn, I think I'm under M. Clark National Referral Network. But there's a lot of ways to get a hold of me, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Fantastic. Well, folks, thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to share this episode. A lot of folks need to hear what Micah shared with us today. So care and share and care, however that is. Folks need financial literacy, and it's something that most of us were not taught. But as Mike taught us today, it's entirely learnable. And then you hire those experts who know what you don't. That's how we do this game. Stay tuned. We'll be shooting another episode of Uplevel Your Communication next week. Take care, and thanks for being here with us. Thanks for watching. Be sure to share our show with the key leadership at your company and with your friends. If you know in your heart that you're ready to up-level your speaking, stage presence, and impact, visit milunafausch.com to schedule a complimentary call. You can also purchase my book and our podcast music, Strong Body.
Thank you for enjoying this content by Billionaires in Boxes. If you would like to be a guest or a host, be sure to get in contact with us at billionairesinboxes.com.